Super Mario 64. I jumped off a cliff, drowned in a moat, got mauled by a dog, got bowled over, and died to a walking sentient cupcake. All before I ever got my very first star. And I heard it clearly in my ears at the ripe age of 9 or so. Just get good. This is easy stuff, right? Move your main man Mario with the stick and jump your way up to the star. It should be easy. Most people can do this without a problem. But it was very different back then. Imagine if the only other Mario game you ever played before this was Super Mario World. In that game, you mostly had to move left and right, occasionally input up and down, and jump your way to the end goal. You and I can do it easily enough. But when you add on a whole extra dimension, you not only create a lot of opportunities for creativity and immersion, you also make just as many possibilities for problems and frustrations. Hello everyone, it is so good to see you. I feel as though I'm relaying a lot of common knowledge, but there's something that brought this to my mind lately. My sisters have a Switch and they get to play games, well, sometimes. Mostly when friends are over, since the family doesn't really let them play very often. I try to play with them when I can, and my oldest little sister Alma has some knowledge of games like Super Mario Bros. Wonder, which we've played before. But I wanted to try something. If I gave her the exact N64 controller that I used to play my first 3D game, Super Mario 64, how long would it take for her to get her first star? Would she adapt very quickly to moving around in 3 dimensions, or is jumping in a game like Mario 64 going to be a little too obtuse to understand? I remember having a lot of difficulty going from 2D to my first 3D game. Alma is basically the same age that I was when I first tried Mario 64. She's played some 2D Mario games and a small sampling of others, so I think we are fairly close in gaming experience compared to when I did this. But how long would it take for her to adapt to a game like this and defeat the big Bob-omb? I handed her the weird little controller so that we could see. Almost all the footage that you see from here on Bob-omb Battlefield is Alma taking control. The 2 younger sisters also couldn't help but watch and commentate the entire time as well. Before even playing, we were hit with the biggest bombshell of the entire run. Peach used to be called Princess Toadstool.
Toadstool? Who's Toadstool?
Absolutely unplayable. For the most part, I didn't want to tell Alma too much aside from the basics like running, jumping, and camera controls. And of course, whatever the game was telling her. I was thinking Alma was going to run around and goof off in the courtyard, but no, she wanted to get right to it and get in the game. I found it funny that every time she wanted to adjust the camera, she came to a complete stop to move it, which I discovered is a pretty common behavior if you're not super used to 3D movement. Alma ended up experimenting with movement and jumping more in the castle than outside, and bounced around a bit before finally discovering the painting that can be jumped into. Unless you go around and talk to Toad or read the signs, there's not really much indication that this thing on the wall is important. It is, of course, second nature to us, but the empty room isn't too extremely well telegraphed that the painting can be jumped into, is it? Getting inside, Alma's main compulsion was to destroy everything in her path. Boxes, Goombas, Bob-ombs, they are all dead to her. It takes a moment to understand the contextual actions of punching over grabbing, but this is good. She'll need to be aware of picking up versus punching to attack real soon. It was right here that I was asked a very interesting question.
Lava? Is that lava?
And you know what? From here, given the visual resolution, I can definitely see how someone can mistake that for lava. Actual lava in the game is either a gradient of darker reds or slowly moving and rippling like the inside of the volcano. And it's that movement, also with the bubbling animations, that help give it the idea that it's dangerous. Much like with sand that you can sink into and poisonous gas of Hazy Maze Cave, if the floor has movement, it's usually meant to communicate that it's dangerous to Mario. The only exception is water because, well, it naturally moves, and we all know blue water is harmless. Unless it's freezing, but that's a very rare occurrence. Since we spoke to the pink Bob-omb, we thought that one of these bombs might have had the star, so she went on sort of a killing spree. But by doing so, she also learned about what the health meter at the top of the screen was, and also to jump away from Bob-ombs before they exploded. With some minor direction from me, and mostly backseating from her sister, Alma started to make her way up. For some reason, she insisted on using this elevator to get up instead of using the bridge every time, despite it being right next to it. It's not an easy thing to pick up on your first try, but it did help remind her that she can move while jumping as well as latch onto ledges. Afterwards, we were playing with and being bullied by the Chain Chomp. This is very large and frightening when you go from Goombas to something 10 times your size in the first 5 minutes. To be honest, I thought we were going to have problems on this little seesaw bridge here since you need to act fast, maintain your direction, and jump off, but she managed to clear it in one shot. Luck or skill? Slowly taking my time to actually observe the set pieces, you start to see how the developers were piecing together ideas and weird concepts. This little elevator is very strangely out of place with the rest of the environments when you think about it, but they wanted to put something fun here. And is this not video game's very first physics-based seesaw in a 3D setting? It's contextually nonsensical to have this here, even if because video game logic, but it does help the player to understand how your character interacts with the world while giving depth and immersion. It's always fascinating to note just how advanced this game feels. Most people will tell you that Mario handles like a dream. In this, his very first foray into the third dimension, and in 1996. This set the standard for many games that would come after it. There are still games, to this day, that follow its blueprint, sometimes whether they're even platformers or not. However, you have probably heard this in literally any other video that talks about the legacy of Super Mario 64, so we're moving on. The main obstacle was going to be scaling this mountain. She asked me why there were all these balls rolling downhill, and you know, I still can't answer this question. They fire water bombs at us, so why do we have massive cannonballs just rolling downhill? The developer reason is that they couldn't just make scaling the mountain too easy, right? Mario jumps, so make something that Mario can avoid with jumps. There's a nice wide area at first, and you don't even need to interact with the path for a while if you'd rather not. But then it started to tighten up a bit, and despite this, Alma was still clearing through fairly quickly. Is she better than she was making me think? After a slight panic in hitting the mic, I realized that you don't actually have to jump across this gap if you're running at full speed. The next, however, you can feel the hesitation of trying to climb back and stay on track. And this little gap caused a bit more problems. We all have a bit of a panic attack before nearly getting blown up, and we unfortunately slide back down and have to climb up again. We hit a bit of a cycle of sliding down this hill and having to nervously climb up again a few more times.
Oh no, that's a pizza slice. That means one pizza slice. No, you can't get it up.
With only one pizza slice of health left, I realized just how deceptive the hitbox of these cannonballs are. But we do take a hit and die, sadly. We have to start all over.
Oh, what happened?
You have to start over.
All over? All over?
Yes, all over. She mentioned that it was a little hard to tell where she was and where she was going to land after jumping. One of 3D gaming's first problems for players. Super Mario 64 tried its hand at solving a problem that was only created because it was a 3D platformer. Your perspective. In titles made for the Super Nintendo, for example, you don't need to worry about the camera. Games either perfectly follow your protagonist within the frame they're allowed into, or the game lets you move freely while locked into an isometric perspective. Games give you the illusion that there is a complete world that, in your imagination, goes on forever, but is not seen due to the developers keeping you within boundaries. Some games let you nudge it around, but for the most part, it's not the player's responsibility or problem in a game that mainly focuses on the X and Y coordinates. Even in a game like A Link to the Past, while you are moving in every direction, it does not by definition count as a three-dimensional game. 2D games like Super Mario World have a horizon with gravity that your character will stick to the X-axis of. It's like getting down to eye level with a table so that you can't see the surface, just everything on top of it. These platformers will traditionally keep you close to the point of origin, usually not letting you traverse too far above or below, because if you go too far below, you'll often lose a life. Top-down Zelda games remove that horizon and allow you to freely move around in all four quadrants, at least to the extent of the in-game boundaries. Now it's like you're sitting at the table and looking down. And while Link is mostly attached to the point of origin, it feels like there's a lot more freedom to explore this table. However, there's still no actual depth in the game, and any perceived depth is simply the skill of the developers giving you that illusion. Think of when you move behind a tree, for example. In a sprite-based title like this, when you break it down, it's more about the skillful use of masking and collision detection that makes it feel like we're running around or behind a tree. In essence, there is a lot more that can be hidden or overall just not made because nothing exists behind these objects. But then, what happens when you add the Z coordinates? What changes when you make something that can be reached and examined by the player by moving around it? This is just one of many problems that developers discover. There's a lot less to hide now. Players can look around and see every little thing, above the bridge, behind it, beside it, and underneath. And much like how the bushes and clouds in Super Mario Bros. Are the same sprites but recolored, the team had to get creative. Most round objects in Mario 64 aren't actually objects. Bob-ombs, for example, aren't made of polygons but sprites instead. That's how they look so round. At least as smooth a circle as you can get compared to other objects in the game. Just look at the big Bob-omb. The guy is made of balls. Except for the feet. You can tell that the polygonal feet are sharper, more cleanly angular, and have different lighting than his own hands. Even though the body is a sprite, there is a cleverly defined depth to him, which is how the crown looks like it's believably planted on top of a traditional model. The earliest example of this that you can see in the game are in the trees. No matter what angle you look at them, they always have the same highlights and the same shadows because they're not truly modeled even when Mario climbs them. But that distinction might be difficult for some people to see. Alma couldn't completely tell where she would get hit by the cannonballs because they were just sprites with the illusion of depth. Still, that didn't stop her from trying to climb again. Like most of us, she really needed to collect this precarious coin though. The trek up was easier this time, even if she took some cannons to the face. She decided to take the safe way across using the plank this time, and so we reached the boss. And as I expected, he tossed her around a bit until we started to fall off. I especially appreciated this heart on the bottom, even if she didn't fully understand how it worked. There's really only a few of these in the game, isn't there? This fight became a battle of positioning as the camera assumes the rare semi-isometric perspective. The constant automatic zooming in and out kept on confusing her, which I never considered would be a problem before. Since it keeps on adjusting with her movement in this perspective, it was harder to judge positioning. She also kept diving and sometimes was cheaply grabbed and thrown. With the big Bob-omb, the team of this game did everything they could to give the illusion of depth through layers of sprites, polygons, and giving them a drop shadow that helps to guide the eyes to where the back of an enemy is versus the front. Though it's arguably easier to tell where the front and back of Bowser is up close than a ball with PNG stuck on it. We often don't think about it, but in games with no actual lighting, a shadow underneath Mario can help a whole lot with understanding where you are on the Z-axis. It's always one of my favorite subtle ways that games forego realism in favor of a practical solution and aid. Unless the sun is exactly at its apex on a sunny day and stays there, these shadows would make zero sense. If platformers like these always function with proper shadows, even today, positioning would be a little more frustrating. Not impossible, but in this case, a multitude of games would prefer accessibility over realism. It also partially falls under art direction. Getting the third toss on the big Bob-omb was a little harder because of how closely he follows you, but we made progress together. She eventually figured it out, made the throw, and before accidentally flinging herself off the mountain, the same way her brother once did, she grabbed and earned her very first Power Star.
Yay! Peace.
And that took her about 24 minutes or so. It's been a long time, but I don't think I got my first star that quickly. I do recall having issues. For as many times as I've replayed Mario 64, this little experiment made me feel the most nostalgic for it. Because it forced me to slow down and see the stage from somebody who was my age when I was experiencing it for the first time. But you also get to examine, break down, and wonder why a developer placed certain objects and obstacles the way that they did. It's a very thoughtful process, and it shows how a lot of the sections of platforming in a game like this can serve as the building blocks of what games came after it. All of these little moving parts are some of the core elements of game design, and approaching it with the mindset for both developers and players who have never experimented with the Z-axis before, it's been very fascinating. And in some circles, Nintendo didn't even believe that this might be the future. It was such a point of contention that it helped influence the design of the controller. What if 3D didn't work out and was just going to be a novelty for some games? Will we go back to sprite-based games if the general public didn't stick with the idea? That's why a D-pad exists on this side, as a sort of failsafe just in case this little joystick didn't work out the way that they wanted it to. The third dimension was initially approached as the gimmick of this generation, sort of like what motion controls became for the Wii, and that's kind of wild to think about. There are some games that primarily use the D-pad, like Kirby 64, Pokemon Puzzle League, and Mischief Makers, but in the end, there is barely even a handful that do. The stick got its use, sometimes too much use. My palm still hurts from Mario Party. So I guess the whole point of what I'm trying to say is, yeah, game design hard. It is a different language that not everyone can decipher and translate to someone who's never spoken it before, you know? Super Mario 64 was a huge gamble, and yet somehow remains as some people's favorite game of all time. It is still a testament to game design, as well as a pillar of being a title that is just fun to pick up and start playing. This game, say it with me, revolutionized video games in 3D. Its influence is remarkably substantial. Ocarina of Time almost became a completely different game by considering following the concept of the entire adventure taking place in one castle. People will still argue if Banjo-Kazooie is the better platformer or not, even when Banjo-Tooie is right there. There are still many out there who prefer the experience that this game offers over games like Super Mario Odyssey, Mario Galaxy 1 and 2, Mario Sunshine. Let's not get too crazy here. The point is, many of us have great memories of this game. I still remember the days of getting used to it, feeling a little frustrated and eventually picking up the concept of contextual controls one by one. Finding the Wing Cap Palace and having no idea how to control Mario flying in the air. Oh, that's a building. Unlocking Metal Mario from a stage within a stage and thinking it was the coolest thing ever. It was that sense of discovery early on that made things so exciting and scary and whimsical. You didn't know what was behind that door in the basement, inside the sunken pirate ship behind the Eel of Nightmares, or hiding up the endless stairs. I still remember spending at least an hour back in the day trying to figure out how wall jumps worked when I accidentally did one. Then my parents said I can only play 1 hour at a time, a rule of which I probably broke several times, especially when they were gone. They couldn't stop me. There weren't any parental controls on my Nintendo 64. I'm sorry. I think with the 40th anniversary in the air, I just wanted to make something Mario related. And specifically about Super Mario 64 that maybe you haven't seen a dozen times already. My goal was to see that if my sister had similar behaviors to my own when acclimating to the game. I mean, who knows, maybe living in this era with much more advanced technology and high fidelity games would dilute her experience. But she told me she had fun playing the game. Super Mario 64 continues to prove, to this day, that it can be a gateway of sorts to people learning how to play games and understand them in a 3D space. And you know, I'm not sure how long I'll be living with my sisters to be able to do something like this, so it's nice to help enshrine something like this personally. I don't know if they'll ever be as big into games as I am, or if they'll ever even see this video at some point in the future, but it's all good, because I got to spend some time with them between our busy lives. But I think that's about enough out of me. What was the very first game that you played in 3D, and do you remember having difficulty with it? Do you happen to know anyone who just can't get into games because of the third dimension? I'd love to know a bit more in the comments below. As always, consider subscribing to GVG for more features and weirdly specific topics like this. You can support us on Patreon, follow us on Bluesky, and watch us on Twitch. Thank you so much for watching, and remember to take care of yourself. Till we meet again.